time for another school assembly. Welcome back to Notes from School, the podcast. It's episode 18 today, and it is called I Vow to Thee, My Country. Last week, we took kind of a deep dive, historical and musical look at the classic tune, Jerusalem, that many people still know and love, and I feel like today is kind of a bit of a continuation on that episode. This is all about the classic, kind of quite patriotic hymn, or again, is it a hymn, called I Vow to Thee, My Country. So I'm sure if you're listening to this, you've probably heard this tune either sung at weddings, funerals, or been featured in films, or even as part of rugby matches, or before rugby matches. This is, if you haven't listened to Jerusalem, the episode, then feel free to go back one. If you missed that one, it's great. We kind of go into a lot of stuff. I probably won't go into as much musical detail in this one because there's not as much to go on musically in this hymn. But I will get into the history. I'll get into how it kind of came about and who the composer was. But yeah, I Vow to Thee, My Country. I actually, funnily enough, had a call with Scott Mills on Radio 2 a while ago, a couple of years ago, where they did a feature on the Radio 2 show called The Music Police. And they called me up and said, someone's got a song stuck in their head and they don't know what the tune is. Can you help us out? And there was some guy going, do 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 do. So then I just gave like a little 5-minute kind of history of the song. And funnily enough, at the time, on the day that they called me, I was teaching at St. Paul's Boys' School, which I taught at for a couple of years, and the song was actually composed as part of the Planets when the composer was teaching at St. Paul's Girls' School down the road in Hammersmith, so quite close to where I live as well. But we'll get into all that in a bit, because first of all, I just want to have a little bit of a catch-up, as I usually do in each episode at the beginning of each assembly, tell you what I've been up to and what I've got coming up as well. So it's actually been quite a busy week. The previous couple of weeks weren't too bad, but this week I've had 4 shows, plus school, and I was driving all over the country. I went up to St. Helens, near Liverpool, to the Theatre Royal there, which is quite a big building actually. It was kind of a historic theatre in St. Helens, which was a really fun show. It was the gap between the stage and the audience was actually quite big, so it felt a little quieter than it normally does. Like obviously when I was in Soho, it was very, very kind of intimate in a way. Cheltenham Playhouse, I went back for round 2. I had already done a show there in March, so it was great to be back in Cheltenham. And I kind of drove from St. Helens to Cheltenham via Tewkesbury. I stopped off for coffee and just had a wander around the Abbey and around the town. And I went into the Tewkesbury Museum. Shout out Tewkesbury, which was very nice. And then I went back home, and then then I was in school and went to Harlow, did a gig at the Harlow Playhouse, and then I went off to Butlins Minehead for another Butlins weekender, which was great. It was a really fun crowd. So yeah, hit a lot of different areas. Was down the Somerset, Harlow, which is in Essex, I think, just on the edge of Essex. And then all over the place. So I also had a message, but actually just before I get onto the message, what have we got coming up this week? No gigs, no performing this week, just got school, and then it's half term, so I hope you are looking forward to half term if you are a teacher, and if you're not a teacher and you've got kids, then hopefully you've got enough stuff to fill the time. I think in classic British tradition, we've got a bank holiday coming up, and the weather report looks absolutely terrible for the bank holiday weekend. So it's just classic, isn't it? You know, we're all stuck inside the whole week, and the weather's beautiful, and then we get to the weekend, especially as a 3-day weekend, and the weather looks absolutely rubbish. So, hopefully you can still have a good time and enjoy it. But okay, next gig I've got is also back at Butlins in June, and then we're getting into festival season. Shout out also to the podcast called Festival Sounds, who featured me on their podcast this week in a 2-part interview. They said it was so much fun, they didn't want to stop. And we did, about an hour and a bit, hour and 20 minutes interview, and normally they just do about half an hour, so they had to split it up into 2 episodes. So if you want to listen to that, I'm mostly talking about Glastonbury and the route of the Primary School Bangers show. But there we go. Yeah, I've got a message sent through to the emails, and it's a bit of an obscure question. So if anyone knows the answer to this, then feel free to write in. This is from Claire. She said, "Dear James, I saw you at the Soho Theatre recently and had the pleasure of meeting you afterwards. Hello, great to meet you." She says, "Love the podcast. I listen every week and enjoy a good sing-along. Me too. Now my question, and I hope you can help. In 1982, my primary school, Sunnyfields in northwest London, put on a show called Little Billy. It was described as a children's opera. I was in the chorus and loved the music. I think it was about a sailor called Billy. I've tried to find some info or the music but no luck so far. Can you help, please?" I have never heard of this, but if you are aware of this show, if you do know what it is, then I'd love for you to write in and help Claire in a bit of nostalgia that she can't quite kind of listen to it again. I don't know, but maybe it was one that was written for your school. It's funny because with some of these school assembly tunes, a lot of people assume that their teachers wrote the songs that they sang in the school assembly, but for the most part they didn't. But maybe something like this was written by like a local group or something. I'm not sure. I did actually try and take a look online, but I couldn't find anything. Little Billy, the children's opera, did not come up with anything, sadly. But there we go. If you know anything that can help Claire out, then feel free to write in. The email for this podcast is notesfromschoolpodcast@gmail.com. So let's get into it. Today's episode is all about I Vow to Thee, My Country. We're going to kind of look at the history behind one of Britain's most emotional hymns, and it was voted number 6 in the Songs of Praise 2019 poll of the UK's favourite hymn. So it was number 6. Is it a hymn? We'll get into that later on, but I did ask the same question with Jerusalem as well. So I Vow to Thee, My Country. It's played at all sorts of occasions, as I mentioned already. It's a lot of state occasions as well, I think, due to the nature of its content. We're talking about themes of loyalty, sacrifice, and identity. It was played at Princess Diana's wedding in 1981, I think it was, at the same time that Claire was singing Little Billy at school. It's not really a wedding hymn, I would say, I Vow to Thee, My Country. Traditionally, I mean, in terms of the words, you wouldn't really listen to the words and think that it'd be a wedding hymn necessarily, but maybe the idea of loyalty and sacrifice could be applicable to marriage. I know sacrifice, I'm sure, is very important for the success and continuation of a lot of people's marriage. So it could be that. I mean, obviously, it's the name of the hymn is I Vow to Thee, My Country. I guess the idea of vowing, saying your vows, and that's got a wedding context. But I don't think it was really used in weddings, particularly until the Diana and Charles wedding, to my knowledge. And then after that, it was a lot more popular. And then it was used at her funeral as well, very sadly, 16 or so years later. But then it was used at Winston Churchill's funeral, Margaret Thatcher's funeral. It's used in all the Remembrance Day services, and you get those Festival of Remembrances at the Royal Albert Hall, which very weirdly, if you go on YouTube, there's loads of like American YouTubers doing reaction videos to kind of British culture. And they all have like loads of views as well. So it will be like Californian reacts to Land of Hope and Glory at the proms, and it's got like 500,000 views or something, and it's just some guy like nodding his head, smiling while he's watching a video of the proms. And then he just kind of says, "Yeah, man, that was awesome," and then that was it. It's very very bizarre. Maybe that's what I need to do. Instead of doing a podcast, I should just set up a reaction YouTube channel. I can call it Brit Reacts to the Star Spangled Banner, and it's just me like nodding and I'm like, yeah, okay, all right. I don't know. I find that some of those reaction those reaction YouTube channels are so popular. Maybe I should do it. Maybe one day I'll do. It'll be like Brit tastes American food, but it's definitely better the other way around. American tastes British food for the first time. You know, tasting a jar of Marmite and just realizing that it's so disgusting. No, I love Marmite, but anyway, we're getting mildly sidetracked right now. So we said that I Vow to Thee, My Country. It kind of permeates a lot of different times, like Jerusalem, and like things like All Things Bright and Beautiful. It was sung at school. It's sung at weddings and funerals. Interestingly, a lot of the, as I said before, a lot of the school assembly tunes are also used with in sports, either as chants that are kind of sung by the fans, or perhaps they are used as like official anthems. So Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, for example, which I'll probably do an episode on at some point in the future, because that's quite an interesting story, going from like a gospel song to becoming like a rugby anthem. But with I Vow to Thee, My Country, it's been specifically turned into like an unofficial rugby anthem with when it got rewritten as a tune called World in Union. And I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But let's now talk a little bit about how this tune came about. So, who wrote the words to I Vow to Thee, My Country? What came first? I've already told you that the music was written by Gustav Holst. By the way, he was originally called Gustavus van Holst, I think, or von Holst, which is a great name. He should have stuck with that. But it was around the time of the First World War when a lot of people were changing their names to sound less Germanic. So, I mean, the royal family changed their name. Various people changed their name to sound less Germanic. So I think there was Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, weren't they, the royal family, and they changed it to Windsor. I think that's what happened. But he became Gustav Holst, which is still relatively German sounding, I suppose, but he wasn't German, but anyway, he was a British composer, but he didn't write the words, he wrote the music. The words were actually written earlier than the music, interestingly, by a British diplomat from the early 20th century called Cecil Spring Rice. That's a great name, Cecil Spring Rice. And it was based on, he had an original poem called Erb's Day, the City of God. So this kind of originated back to before the First World War, but about 1908, between 1908 to 1912. And it kind of, the poem originally describes how a Christian would owe his loyalties to both the homeland and the heavenly kingdom. So there was another name for this poem called The Two Fatherlands. Okay, the two fatherlands. We probably don't really want to be talking about fatherlands too much. I mean, it's getting a bit Second World War, Third Reich. But anyway, the talking about owing loyalty to the homeland and also to a land, kind of more of a kind of theological land, I suppose. But this guy, Cecil Spring Rice, he was, as I said, he was a British diplomat, and he worked for the British Embassy, and he was actually the ambassador to the United States of America. And he was very close with Woodrow Wilson, and he actually helped convince Wilson to move away from the neutrality that the United States had during the First World War to join Britain in the war against Germany. And it was, ironically, after the United States joined the war, he was dismissed from his post. He wrote this poem before the war, but then he rewrote it after he'd been dismissed. It's not very nice, is it, really? You know, he helped get the Americans on side and get Wilson, bring the Americans into the First World War, which helped accelerate the end of the war, which is great for the British. It helped relieve them a lot. It probably stopped the war a lot earlier than it could have done. But he was rewarded by getting fired by telegram, apparently. So he gets his telegram, he gets fired, then he moves to the United States. And he rewrites this poem, Erb's Day, and he changes it because it had an original first verse, which he then cuts, and then he gets rid of that first verse because it was talking about people dying and the dead. I'll read it to you in a second, and which is a little bit somber, especially after the bleak kind of tragedy of the First World War. So he rewrites this poem, and I'm gonna read it to you now. So this is the Two Fatherlands. Okay, and most of the words you will know, so it is. Here we go. Let's have a sip of juice. I vow to thee, my country, all earthly things above, entire and whole and perfect the service of my love. The love that asks no questions, the love that stands the test, that lays upon the altar the dearest and the best, the love that never falters, the love that pays the price, the love that makes undaunted the final sacrifice. And there's another country I've heard of long ago, most dear to them that love her, most great to them that know. We may not count her armies, we may not see her king. Her fortress is a faithful heart, her pride is suffering. And soul by soul and silently her shining bounds increase, and her ways are ways of gentleness, and all her paths are peace. So those words we know. There was an original first verse which got cut, and this is how the first verse was. I heard my country calling away across the sea. Across the waste of waters she calls and calls to me. Her sword is girded at her side, her helmet on her head, and round her feet are lying the dying and the dead. I hear the noise of battle, the thunder of her guns. I haste to thee, my mother, a son among her sons. Okay, you can see why they cut that one, especially after the First World War. And it is quite clearly a very patriotic devotion to to their homeland, and in this case that might be England. And it's talking about the love of the nation and selfless sacrifice. And but in the second verse, we're kind of talking about another country, which is contrasting, the second fatherland, I guess. And it's that the other land is a spiritual land, a spiritual realm, I guess. And its fortress is a faithful heart, and its pride is suffering. Okay, so that song was eventually put to music, which I'll talk about in a second. And it went into a little songbook called Songs of Praise, which the TV show was named after, I guess. And I've got my copy here. This is an original copy from a long time ago. This is from 1932. And I made my first TikTok top 5 Easter bangers, which I talked about in my Easter podcast episode, using this hymn book. And it is in here. And there's a little companion book to the Songs of Praise book, written by a guy called Percy Dearmer, and he does a commentary on every hymn. He should have had a podcast. And that was written again back in the 1930s. And he says, in the Songs of Praise, it's grouped with the national songs, 2 after the national anthem. And so talking about this hymn, it was written on the 12th of January 1918 by Sir Cecil Arthur Spring Rice, His Majesty's ambassador to the US, on the eve of his final departure from Washington. The vow recorded in them had been kept long before he put it into words, for he had served his country for a quarter of a century with the love that never falters, and though he knew it not, he was already a dying man. He was dying, and he died very soon after he rewrote this poem. And just before he died, actually, he made a speech just before leaving the States, a speech in the Canadian embassy, actually. And in his speech, he talks about the fight of the English in the First World War, and talking about not just English, but the Irish and the Scottish as well. And these were his words in this speech. He says, "The cross is the banner under which we fight, the cross of St. George, the cross of St. Andrew, the cross of St. Patrick, different in form, in colour, in history, yes, but the same spirit, the spirit of sacrifice. We are all subjects of the Prince of Peace who fought the greatest fight ever fought upon this earth, who won the greatest victory and won it by his blood. That is his cross." Right. Okay. So that kind of definitely reveals what he feels about the symbolism of that, about the love that asks no question, and the love that never falters and pays the price, and pays the final sacrifice as well. And then he gives a speech. gets ready to leave the United States to come back to England, and he dies. He passes away. Apparently he was out on his skis all day, having a good time at dinner. By midnight he goes to bed, and his wife comes up the next morning. I don't know they were not in the same room, and she finds him. He's passed away, and it's only a few weeks after he wrote these final words. So so he dies in the beginning of February 1918, and because he had been fired from his job, he didn't have a pension, he didn't have any income, so his family doesn't have any money. And in order to raise money, there's a memorial fund that helps his family out. So it's called the Cecil Spring Rice Memorial Fund, and it helps his family due to kind of the service he gave the country. And I think probably quite right. I mean, if he helped bring a close to the war, and he was unceremoniously dumped. But here's a really interesting fact. The money that was raised to help his family helped fund his daughter to be sent to school in England. And she was taught at St. Paul's Girls' School in Hammersmith in London. And guess what? In her class was a girl called Imogen Holst. Her father was the head of music, Gustav Holst. And that's where the connection was. So Imogen Holst was friends with the daughter of this guy, Cecil Spring Rice. And Imogen Holst herself was actually a very important figure in 20th century music. She was good friends with Benjamin Britten. And she was a collector of folk songs and a composer in her own right. But that was the connection with Holst. And so, in the meantime, actually a year before the end of the First World War, and a year before Cecil Spring Rice had rewritten this poem, Gustav Holst wrote a series of kind of movements called The Planets. It was a classical piece of music, and I'm sure you have heard of it. I'm sure you may have even seen it in a concert of some form. And if not, you've almost definitely heard either the suites Mars, the movements Mars or Jupiter. And the movement Jupiter, which is the jolly one, supposedly, has this really beautiful melody about halfway through. And this melody gets lifted. Okay. Unbelievably, the melody of Jupiter actually fits pretty much exactly the words that Cecil Spring Rice had written. And another fact, actually, apparently Holst slightly regretted writing, using the tune of Jupiter for this hymn, I Vow to Thee, My Country, because the reason he slightly regretted it was because the hymn is sung quite slowly, and it's sung quite powerfully as part of all these kind of Remembrance Day services and things like that. So whenever anyone actually performed the piece, they always slow down at that bit, and he didn't like that, apparently. So if you go back and listen to Holst actually conducting the Planets, very old recordings from about 100 years ago, he does it quite fast, actually. The fastest recordings out there of the Planets are conducted by Holst. The movement Jupiter is actually kind of captioned the bringer of jollity. So it's supposed to be quite kind of upbeat and jolly. But anyway, he writes the Planets. That's a massive hit. And he gets contacted by another English composer called Ralph Vaughan Williams, who you probably know from a piece called The Lark Ascending or other pieces. He's got some fantastic symphonies and all sorts of choral works, and he wrote a lot of hymns, and he was a collector of folk songs as well. And he put together this book, Songs of Praise. He asked Holst to write a hymn. So Holst took the words that he had got from, possibly, I mean, it's not entirely clear, but most probably from Cecil Spring Rice's daughter, who gave them to his daughter, Imogen Holst, who then passed on to him. And he fitted, they kind of perfectly match, really, the words of Cecil Spring Rice to the tune from Jupiter. And every hymn tune has a name that isn't the first line of the hymn. So they all have kind of nicknames, I guess, for some reason. And he named this hymn Thaxted, after the village in which he was living when he wrote Jupiter. And if you go into the hymn book, it's actually got 2 melodies here. We've got Thaxted by Gustav Holst, I Vow to Thee My Country. This is the melody by Holst. But there's a second tune in the hymn book, and it is by Vaughan Williams, the guy that put together the hymn book. So he wrote his own version called Abinger. It's a really quite obscure version. It's not well known at all. So what I'm going to do for you now is actually sing you the first verse of this obscure tune, Abinger, which is the same words, different melody. As I've said in other podcasts, a lot of these hymn tunes have the same words but different tunes. So I'm going to play for you now the obscure, not very well-known version of I Vow to Thee My Country by Vaughan Williams called Abinger. So let's see. I'd love to know if you've actually sung this one before. It's not as well known. I vow to thee, my country, all earthly things above, entire and whole and perfect, the service of my love, the love that asks no question, the love that stands the test, that lays upon the altar the dearest and the best, the love that never falters, the love that pays the price, the love that makes undaunted the final sacrifice. There we go. That is the Vaughan Williams version of I Vow to Thee My Country. It's quite hard to sing. It goes very high, and it's quite a tricky melody. Vaughan Williams was very inspired by folk melodies and also very old kind of Gregorian chant melodies as well. He had a classical piece called Theme from Fantasia on a Theme of Thomas Tallis, an old kind of composer from the 1500s. And so he's very into very old music and folk tunes as well. But they don't always translate to the best hymns, I've got to say. His isn't particularly well known, but Thaxted, Holst's hymn, is obviously very well known, especially because of the popularity of Jupiter and the popularity of the planets. By the way, that Vaughan Williams version was added into this update, which was the 1931 Songs of Praise. And so Percy Dearmer, who I mentioned before, who did the commentary book, he said that he talked to the melody saying it is a flowing melody, very flexible and expressive, yet of simple and economical construction, a most attractive and moving tune. I wouldn't necessarily say it was simple and economical, but there we go. Because he wrote this tune while he was working at St. Paul's, it also became the kind of de facto school song of St. Paul's girls and boys' schools. So they both use it, and whenever they do St. Paul's kind of like big occasions, they always sing that tune, and they still sing it in assembly. I know they still sing it in assembly. They don't actually sing that many tunes in assembly at St. Paul's, but they do I Vow to Thee My Country. But what about its kind of patriotism? And obviously we see it as a very patriotic song talking about the sacrifice, and it's, well loved, sung in Remembrance Day services and talking about the armed forces. But it has been criticized as well. I mean, if you think about sports matches, this is something that happens quite often in the States. You'll have a baseball game or something, and someone will get up and sing the Star Spangled Banner, and there's some absolutely amazingly awful versions of the Star Spangled Banner sung at some sports games in the States. You can probably go down a bit of a rabbit hole of some of those, but that does get criticized, even in a country like America, which, is very patriotic. People doing the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag every day in school. instead of singing school assembly songs. It still, it still gets criticised there, and it does here as well. But is it possible to kind of talk about that sacrifice without glorifying war and kind of glorifying militaristic themes? I guess we had the same chat last week with Jerusalem. Can it be called a hymn when it's not really a prayer as such? I feel like this hymn is probably a bit more accepted than Jerusalem in some ways, because it's I don't know, it feels more like it's been written as a hymn as opposed to Jerusalem, which feels like it's been written more as an anthem, in that it's got like this whole kind of crazy piano part where it goes all over the place, and it's got a big introduction and coda, which sounds like it should be being played by an orchestra. But it has been criticised, I Vow to Thee, My Country. There is no mention of God specifically in it, I suppose. It is a poem rather than written as a hymn or as a prayer. And a lot of people think that, singing it, you shouldn't be promoting your allegiance to the state in a hymn. Apparently, the Bishop of Hume hit the headlines when he called the hymn heretical. That seems a bit strong. But he said he felt the hymn appealed to those who wanted to believe that Britain was a superior nation to all others, and it was very wrong to promote that Christians should unquestionably support whatever their country said or did. To be fair, he did say that in 2004, which, if you think about what was happening in the news at that time and in the UK, that was when we were going into Iraq. So, very, very, very controversial decision there. And I'm going to get Alistair Campbell on the next episode of Notes from School talking about that decision. No, imagine. Maybe one day I get him on. With all of that chat, there was an alternate version of I Vow to Thee, written by Billy Bragg, who also talks a lot about Jerusalem as well, and I think he rewrote the words to Jerusalem at some point. So his words are: "We vow to build a country where all can live in health, where no child need live in poverty, where we will share our wealth, where we fulfill the true potential of each and every one, and we achieve more together than we achieve alone. As Democrats and Socialists, we hold this to be true, from each by their ability, to everyone their due. We vow to build a country where none of us take heed of birth or disability, of race or sex or creed. By the strength of our endeavour, we can build the world anew, and put the power in the hands of the many, not the few. For there is a simple principle that no one shall displace. We are all alike in humankind, we are the human race." There we go. Okay, well done, Billy Bragg. What a legend. But again, I think a lot of people said that's not exactly a great alternate version either, because that's kind of promoting socialism rather than patriotism. But there we go. So just another kind of quote from a vicar in 2013 who campaigned against its continued use, saying that, he was saying kind of it's wrong in a post-colonial age to be singing a hymn that was about fighting for king and country and so preserving an empire. He also said it was theologically inept to link surrendering one's life for one's country with worthwhile sacrifice if the cause of the war was just wealth, power, influence, and national pride. Suffering in that context was just obscene. There we go. That's a very strong point of view. You could argue, in all fairness, that the words were written by a guy who was patriotic to the point of stopping war, in that his kind of goal was to end the war through discussion rather than fighting. So he was trying to kind of get it done, get it finished politically rather than militarily. But there we go. But it's still, it's still sung in school assemblies. It's still sung all over the place, like national services. And I don't know, maybe write in, let me know. Do you think that we should still be singing songs like Jerusalem and I Vow to Thee, My Country in schools? You could argue, a lot of people argue you shouldn't be singing any songs in school that have any kind of religious content unless it's a religious school. I grew up going to a school that was not religious, but we still sang all the Come and Praise tunes, and that's the case all over the country, really. It was a BBC drive to get Come and Praise sung in all the schools around the country, and got people singing, and they still sing. So yeah, it's a very interesting debate. Maybe this episode is, there's not a guest, so it's kind of a monologue, I guess. But it would be interesting to kind of open it up to a bit of debate about whether we should be singing songs in school about national pride, national identity, about religion. And if not, then what do we sing about? Do we sing about random stuff that's got nothing to do with the kind of the year, I don't know, from a religious sense, like Easter and Christmas? And if we completely take religion out of schools, what do you then sing about? Do you sing about kind of communal values? And do we sing about, I don't know, what you ate for breakfast? I don't know. But I mean, I'm sure there's loads and loads of themes that you can sing about. But yeah, I mean, as I said, there's a big link kind of thematically between Jerusalem and I Vow to Thee, My Country. You could assume they were written by the same person, but they weren't. I mean, Holst and Parry were both very successful composers in their own right, and a lot of people wouldn't even necessarily realize that they wrote these hymn tunes, but they didn't actually work together. They were I think Holst was just after Parry in terms of his kind of timeline. Parry actually was the director of the Royal College of Music, and that's where Holst studied as well. But not directly as his student. So he was definitely inspired by his writing and their shared love of English identity and choral music and all of that kind of stuff. But there was one more kind of element to this song after its popularity as a hymn, and I mentioned earlier that it's used quite often in sports matches, in rugby particularly. It was rewritten again to become a rugby anthem. There's a dream I feel so rare, so real. Oh, the world in union, the world as one. It's the World in Union song, which is played at every rugby World Cup. But the really interesting thing about this is that the World in Union takes it away from being a specifically English song to becoming a universal song. Hence, World in Union. I guess you got the pun on rugby union as well. But it was rewritten in 1991 and sung by Kiri Te Kanawa, the Kiwi, the New Zealand opera singer. So she sang it. Then after that, it was sung by Ladysmith Black Mambazo from South Africa. It was sung by Shirley Bassey and Bryn Terfel. So we've got the Welsh represented. Hayley Westenra, also New Zealand. We've got Paloma Faith, English, Emily Sande, and Kiyoe Yoshioka, Japanese, I assume. So yeah, and also some South African choirs singing it. So all different countries singing this song, which feels almost stereotypically British, if not stereotypically English. So it's interesting that it's kind of evolved from being that tune that is so such a patriotic hymn to being something that's universal, and I guess it's got that kind of universal message, I suppose, that in the World in Union song they take out any of the military kind of stuff and they take out any of the religious stuff, and it's they actually say every creed, every colour, once joined, never apart. So yeah, kind of taking it to all different beliefs. But there we go. I think we should probably wrap up there because that's a lot of information, and I hope you enjoyed it. But of course, when I say wrap up there, we can't finish without a sing-along. And I've been talking all about this hymn, I Vow to Thee, My Country. It's now time to sing along to it. Okay, so have a drink, have a cup of tea, and let's get into the sing-along section of today's assembly, I Vow to Thee, My Country. I vow to thee, my country, all earthly things above, entire and whole and perfect, the service of my love, the love that asks no question, the love that stands the test, that lays upon the altar the dearest and the best, the love that never falters, the love that pays the price, the love that makes undaunted verse 2. Here we go. And but there's another country I've heard of long ago, most dear to them that love her, most great to them that know. We may not see her king, her fortress is a faithful heart, her pride is suffering, and soul by soul and silently her shining bounds increase, and her ways are ways of gentleness, and all her paths are peace. I vow to thee, my country, there it is. Gustav Holst, Cecil Springrice. Now you know the whole story behind this hymn. And next week, I hope you have been enjoying these episodes. As I said before, I'm trying to switch it up a little bit each time. I've been really enjoying doing the interviews and some of these school assembly songs and getting a bit more kind of historical in the last couple of episodes that I found really, really interesting. So I hope you have as well. Next week, we're going to go on to another very English, iconic writer. But he wasn't a songwriter. He's someone that you might know from a little book called The Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm going to be talking about Tolkien and his lost songs. So I grew up with my dad reading The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings to me as a young boy. And so I've got it in my DNA. I went to the cinema watching every film. Even on my first date with my wife, we talked about our joint love of Tolkien. And I heard about this book that he released just before he died, which had musical settings of some of the songs that are featured in Lord of the Rings. So much like Shakespeare, when you have the songs, in Tolkien, the songs are kind of written out without the music. And they've been set to music by a composer called Donald Swann, if you know Flanders and Swann. So I'm going to get into that next week. The Road Goes Ever On and On is the book, but interesting because they might not have met, but Holst and Tolkien, I feel, in my mind, kind of share a similar kind of creative landscape, cultural landscape, I suppose, with their kind of visions of mythical lands and all that kind of stuff, and yearning for kind of some kind of lost past and all this kind of stuff. But I also feel if you listen to The Planets by Holst, you can very much have The Planets as a soundtrack to The Lord of the Rings. And I know that The Planets Holst was a massive influence on a lot of film composers like John Williams. So I actually put up a video on YouTube a little while ago, which was did John Williams steal these themes from various other things, including The Planets, and he used a lot of Mars. Howard Shore Howard Shore, who wrote Lord of the Rings, didn't quite as obviously take the music from Holst, but definitely inspired by it. And there we go. I should probably wrap up this episode. I really hope you've enjoyed listening to it. It's the end of today's assembly. Can't wait to see you again for next week's assembly, where we're going to talk about Tolkien. And if you want to get in touch, notesfromschoolpodcast@gmail.com is the email address. Send me a message online as well. And if you've enjoyed it, please feel free to share it. Please add a review, hopefully 5 stars. That will really help with the visibility of this podcast and getting it out to people that might find it interesting. In the meantime, keep smiling, keep on singing, and I'll see you again for next week's assembly next Wednesday. Class dismissed. Have a great week.